Well, welcome to the Rivers Crossing podcast. My name's Josh. I'm the creative arts pastor here at Rivers Crossing, joined with my just exceptional, amazing best friend in the history of the world, Brandon, who is our worship experience pastor. And we have a special guest today, a new friend of mine, Coit, Edison. Coit, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I noticed I'm not your most special, perfect friend today, but maybe I'll work on that.
You can get there. Brandon has set a lofty bar. Yeah.
Well, Coit, one thing we want to do before we get started is give you a gift as a way to say thank you for being here. So you have choices between A and B. Pick one.
I'm going to go with B. Yes, thank
Rivers
you.
Crossing hat.
Thank you.
Look, we'll be twins. This is good.
What was choice A?
Choice A was a shirt. You can have that too.
You like yellow? Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you.
And the mug too.
Man, we're loading him up.
Just don't tell Pastor Sharp we gave any of that stuff away. He'll never watch this, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're good.
Now, Coit, I don't know you well. I know we both have a little bit of background in manufacturing. So just would love to hear a little bit more about you. Who is Coit Edison, as vague as that can be, just tell me a little bit more about you.
Okay, so I'll start with family. So my wife, Lee, we've been married for 32 years. This is the time you're supposed to say you don't look that old.
You don't. I was going to say it.
It was
wait,
just so obvious.
Yeah.
I
was going to wait for him to finish,
So 32 years, we have 3 kids, 3 adult kids. All 3 went to Ohio State. So yes, we were watching the game. And it was a great game, I will say. But that was fun. And so my oldest daughter, Haley, is married. And she is a nurse at Cincinnati Children's. Her husband just got back from a year-long deployment in the Army National Guard. He was in Djibouti, Africa, and he's also a nurse. And then our middle child is Will. He's married. They're both here locally, and Will actually works with us, which is a great blessing.
That's cool.
And then our youngest, Claire, is still up in Columbus. She graduated Ohio State a few years ago, and she works for Abercrombie. And she just got engaged a couple of months ago, so she'll be married later this year. So that's family. Work-wise, we have a material handling dealership. The name of the company is MH Equipment Company. I kind of like that nobody actually knows anything about us. Anonymity is something that I do enjoy from time to time. So just real quick on the company. So we are privately owned. We really strive to be a culture-driven company. All of the owners are believers. We say that we're not a Christian company, but we do attempt to run the business on biblical principles. Sure. Yeah. What we do is we sell, rent, service, lease all material handling equipment, lift trucks, some construction equipment, aerial work platforms, personnel carriers, basically anything, automation, anything that moves people or product within a really diverse customer base. So it can be something as simple as a manual lift all the way to a fully automated warehouse. So I've been doing that for pretty most of my career after college. So that's what we do. Very
cool. Yeah, I know you mentioned, and when you and I were trading some emails, mentioned that not a lot of people are familiar with your company. Yes. I'd heard your company's name before, and when we were walking upstairs to film this, even realizing we've both been in the same facility, a large aerospace facility in South Carolina. So, so we could sit here and turn the podcast into just manufacturing for the next hour. And
what would I do though?
Yeah, that's never been one of my concerns.
Okay.
What you would do, but,
okay.
But we're not going to
carry on.
We're not going to do it out of respect for you and for everyone else watching who would instantly tune out. But we'd have a good time with it. So, okay. So tell me a little bit about the process for you of becoming a believer, or, I know some people say like, I grew up a Christian, but this is the age where I took it serious, or some people just, never inside of a church for decades. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so that's a long story and a really good question. Maybe break it up into a couple different parts, but I was really fortunate and blessed. I grew up in a Christian home with a mom and a dad, and we were in church pretty much every Sunday. I had a lot of adult role models around me that were also Christians and really good influences in my life, both part of my family as well as other adults not in the family. So I grew up in a conservative Presbyterian church in the suburbs of Chicago. And we were in church every Sunday and most every Tuesday or Wednesday, depending upon what was going on at the church. And our church did something really unique. When I was probably, 10 or 11, they hired a new youth minister. And we had a pretty good youth program at the time. But if you looked at our church and kind of the conservative background of our church, and most men were wearing a coat and tie on a Sunday, and then you looked at our youth pastor, he looked more like a street minister than he did a Presbyterian minister. But it was someone that I got really close to, and our church really became the place to be for kids in our community. Everyone wanted to be there, and along the way, we were all learning. And so, things like grace and forgiveness and unconditional love and all these things just really started becoming real for me as about 11 years old at the time. And asking a lot of questions. I like to ask questions. I like to learn. And so, long story short, I always went to a church camp in Saugatuck, Michigan. And one summer I was there and I climbed a tree and I asked Jesus to be my Lord and Savior, and became saved that weekend in a church camp. So that was the fun part. The really uncomfortable part was about a week later, I had to stand in front of my church and give my testimony when I was 12 years old. So that's how I became a Christian.
Very awesome. Cool. I love that story so much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. So at 12, right?
Yes.
Okay. So 12 years old is when you make the commitment, I'm going to follow Jesus now and forever. Mm-hmm. And then you become an adult.
Yes. And
now money enters the equation of following Jesus. So at what point, because I know you've got some really cool principles around money that I love, and we're going to get into all of them. At what point would you say money became important to you? And how that incorporated into your faith, the importance of what you do with money. Was that really early on, 16, first job, or did that come later on down the line?
Yeah. So again, you're going to ask all the hard questions, I can tell, but I would say money was always important, but for the wrong reasons. Grew up in at least a middle class, if not upper middle class family. So my parents, set a good example on giving and generosity, but I really didn't understand a lot of that. And so my wife, who's, also a believer and been a believer for as long as I have been as well. So, we knew all the right things. We, were both learning and growing, but kind of in the, as we were first married, 32 years ago, we just got busy and didn't really understand, some of the things. Let me back up and just say my grandparents on my mom's side, they started a church in Raleigh, North Carolina called Forest Hills Baptist Church. So I had a really strong background on different things. But when my grandpa died when I was in college, and my grandma gave me a Bible at the time for Christmas, and inside she had written a note, and it said, "Put Christ first in everything that you do, and everything will fall into place. He will provide for you." And I looked at that and I really treasured that Bible, but I didn't really understand what she had written for me. And I certainly wasn't living that out consistently. So, flash forward, we're married. Things are going well in my job. I keep progressing in my career, and, at that time thinking everything is about my career in terms of, what I do mostly during the week. And so we got transferred. We now have 2 kids. We get transferred from Illinois to where we're really comfortable. We have a lot of friends and everything's going well. And I have a, active social life and just, a lot of good support structure. And we get transferred to Greenville, North Carolina, in the eastern part of the state where East Carolina University is. And we're driving around. We're really not in church and have just a lot of excuses on, we're busy. We have 2 young kids. I have a new job. We have a new house, and just the busyness of life, letting that, just kind of sit there and take over. And we're driving around in our minivan, of course. And my oldest daughter, Haley, and she's really young at this time when we're, this is in probably in the late 90s. So driving around, and she's like, telling my wife Lee and I that, this is my friend so-and-so, and he goes to this church. This is my friend so-and-so, and she goes to this church. And she's going on and on and on. And all of a sudden she says to Liam, she said, why don't we have a church? And boy, you talk about just being pierced and convicted all at one time when you hear the voice of God speaking through your young child. Yeah. And so my wife and I both prayed about that, and we knew instantly that we had to recommit. We had to rededicate our lives, and we did that. And that next Sunday, we were in a church, that we ended up getting really involved in. I got baptized again as an adult, cool. Believer's baptism. And we started really living out what my grandma had put in that Bible way back when. It said, put Christ first in everything that you do, and everything will fall in place. And that included tithing. And it was at that time where I started just really having peace about these things. So what I didn't tell you is my background is finance.
Okay.
So I'm pretty good with numbers. I'm comfortable with numbers. But, way before this time, in a relationship, in a marriage, in a family, money can always be a source of tension. Yeah. And I learned a really valuable lesson early on that as much as I was comfortable with numbers, it was important for me to let that go. And that just it just opened up a heart of generosity. It gave me tremendous peace. And then flash forward when we recommit ourselves to the Lord and start tithing and just giving generously, the joy and the peace that we both had, and really the alignment in our marriage. And I've seen so many examples of how we've just become so aligned in our generosity. So that's, to answer your question, no, we were not, and certainly me, money, yes, money has been important, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And then recommitting our lives when you hear the voice of God speak through your young daughter, why don't we have a church, and just, recommitting, and then starting tithing at that point.
That's really cool. Yeah. And, one of the cool things about you is that, that heart of generosity, has carried over from your personal life to your business. Yes. And we played golf together before, and I remember hearing, a lot about your story and your business, and asking a lot of questions, and would love for you just to share a little bit. Earlier you mentioned about how a lot of the leaders of your business are believers in Jesus, and that's very unique. But I'd love to hear just how some of that heart, that generosity has spilled over into your business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe at some point I'll tell you the story on how we came here, because I wasn't always with the company. It's been 20 years since I joined them, but that's another voice of God speaking through my daughter on how we came here. But cool. Yeah, so we have our own foundation. It's called His First Foundation. We do tithe as a company. We commit 10% of our budgeted net income, or 10% of actual, whichever is greater, to the foundation. So cool. And in our, logo for His First Foundation, we reference Exodus 23:19. Give the best of the first fruits of the soil or your work to the house of the Lord. Yeah. So how that came about is really something only God can orchestrate. So over 20 years ago, we've grown as a company from 3 locations to 30, and about 50 employees to 950. And mostly grown through acquisitions, as well as some organic growth. But the company had made an acquisition a long time ago, over 20 years ago, and had really coveted the acquisition, which is not a good thing. And with that, we overpaid, and it really got taken out to the woodshed because at that time we were losing money. And really didn't have a strategy on what we were going to do next, other than we hoped that next month would be better than the previous month was, but we were losing money as a company. And so at that time, the senior leaders, the owners, said, what, we need to put our money, even though we didn't have any, put our money where our mouth is, and we need to start walking the talk. And so a decision was made at that time to tithe as a company. And we said, we're going to commit 10% of our budgeted net income, or 10% of actual, whichever is greater, to the foundation. And that was really a watershed moment for us as a company. to take that step of faith and say, God, we know you got this, and we trust in you, and we haven't always, and we've made mistakes, and you're faithful, and we put our trust in you, and we haven't wavered from that commitment. That's a budgeted item for all of our operations, all of our branches see it on their own financial statements that, there is His First Foundation, our donations, and it gives us an opportunity to really invest in our communities. So I'll stop because I you might have some questions.
Yeah. You could have talked for a while if you listened to that for a while, but I would love to unpack a couple of things, because I would imagine the conversation you had with your partners is very similar to conversations that happen inside of marriages of, we can't afford to do this, and yet we have to do this. But the one thing that I loved that you said was when you begin to balance out on the very front end of some of those conversations of we're going to make this commitment. And as businesses begin to fight for margin, right? How can we take our margin from 7% to 7.5%? That becomes a very successful company, right? To grow just by half a percentage. And for you guys to step in and say, we're going to take 10% away from our margin. I mean, that's how companies go out of business. So I love the idea of, from a business standpoint, looking at your balance sheet and saying, we're going to do something that makes no sense because it's scriptural. And the challenge that would then extend into our personal finances of, this makes no sense. I'm going to do it anyway because I trust God. I love that challenge. What did those conversations look like? Was there a lot of pushback? Was there some?
No, yeah. So I will say that the CEO at the time, who's also still the CEO, he was the one who was driving this conversation. And he was the one who also said, look, I will make a personal commitment that whatever that number ends up being, if we can't afford it as a company, I will write the check.
That's incredible.
So, and in the end, that didn't have to happen, but he was that committed, and we were everyone was that committed that that's what we were going to do. So, I will say, we have had to put some structure around it, because in the last 20 years, we have committed millions and millions of dollars to various ministries, charitable organizations, secular good works, random acts of kindness, to our communities where we work and live. And so there is some structure behind it. We tell our employees that we want you to get involved in something. Get involved in something outside of work, because life is just so much richer if you are involved in something outside of yourself and outside of work. And we encourage them to get involved, have some skin in the game, either with their time or money, and then let us celebrate their passion, and we'll write a check in 3 different areas: non-denominational, faith-based organizations whose love it is to share the love of Jesus Christ, secular good works organizations, which is pretty much everything else. A lot of sports teams, a lot of fun stuff like that, and then random acts of kindness. And unfortunately, we're in the Midwest, and we had tornadoes in Illinois 7 or 8 years ago. Just a little over a year ago, we had tornadoes in part of our territory in Western Kentucky, and we're able to come alongside a lot of families and just random acts of kindness and say, hey, we see you, and we want to help in any way we can, even if it's small. So that's been a really neat thing to be able to have the same commitment in my personal life as well as in my business life, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to ask too. Is I can only imagine that the leadership acting that way, like how that has trickled down to the employees. I mean, you guys have to be an awesome company to work for.
Well, I will say we make a lot of mistakes. There's just like everybody else, we're human. We're sinful by nature, and we make mistakes. We do try and run the business on biblical principles. We try and have a really solid culture, but in the end, we do make mistakes. And I think we do an employee survey, every couple of years, like most every company. And one of the things that's almost the highest rated question every year for the last several surveys is that I understand the company's desire to invest in our communities through the foundation. So really thankful for that. Real quickly, we had an opportunity to live that out during COVID. And that was, we didn't know, if you think back to 2020, none of us knew what to expect. And, sometimes it's hard for our employees and even the leaders to understand, okay, we're giving back to the community so much. What about, all of us?
Yeah.
And, that's a natural question. But during COVID, we, three of us got together and we said, we're not going to lay off anybody. We have no idea what COVID is going to be. We knew we were going to be impacted, but we made the decision and just trusting in God that He had this. The employees were the ones that had built the company, not us. We're going to trust God that He's going to provide for us. And we made the decision not to lay anybody off. And we told our employees that, and we said, look, if we don't have work for you, can we send you out to areas that in our communities that need work? And our employees said, absolutely, yes. So we sent people out to food banks. We sent people out just into various areas. We paid them to go to work in food banks. And it was that, again, I talked about the foundation being a watershed moment for our company. That was as well, to be able to make the connection so people can really see where the heart is and what we desire to do and how we desire to, to share the love of Jesus Christ and to live that out and say, look, we're not going to lay anybody off, but we may not have work for you. We're still going to pay you, but we really would like for you to be busy. So please go out and work in the food banks.
Yeah,
and they did.
Yeah. I think it's always like, every company says we make the best quality, and it's easy to say and hard to do. And I think what's really cool about what you guys have done is you took a really challenging vision to present. And then you just have lived it out in so many different ways, and the impact that has had to have had on people's lives from not losing their livelihood in COVID. I was in manufacturing as well, and was fortunate enough. I worked for a company that the ownership said the same thing. We're not going to let people go or lay people off. We're going to keep plugging away. And the relief that gives you is the financial provider of your household, and just the impact you've had on people and what you've been able to teach your employees about giving and about generosity, what that's happened in their personal lives. And I'm just curious, what has happened in your personal life? Like, how would you say generosity and tithing specifically, how has that impacted your relationship with God?
Yeah. So, and again, I don't want to come across as a person that has it all figured out. Sure. And has always done everything right and is doing that today. I still make a lot of mistakes. I'm still growing. I'm still learning. And, I talked about when my wife and I made the commitment and recommitted our lives into tithing. And that, for me, I think it's just given me incredible peace. I know that God is going to provide. I know that God is going to be good. No matter what the circumstances are, God is good. And, I think about, one of my favorite Bible verses, which you might find this is unusual, but it's John 16:33. I tell you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And I really reflect on that a lot, because it doesn't mean that I'm not going to have challenges. Sure. We've all had challenges, and my family has had more than their fair share, but I do know who my Savior is. Yeah. And with that, I just have tremendous peace that He's going to continue to provide for me no matter what my current circumstances or challenges are. So another thing is that I've seen clearly is just really alignment with my wife. Again, my background is finance. I like to know numbers. I like to know things. I like to be in control of a lot of things. I like to have a lot of spreadsheets. But I had to learn to really let that go. And in the end, she is so much better than I am in managing that part of our lives. And it's just given us amazing alignment on not only on tithing, but just in generosity. And we were out to dinner, just real quick. We were out to dinner this past week, and I don't want you to think this is more than it is, because I can find humility pretty easily, and God has a great way of showing me humility. Yeah. But we're out to dinner, and we're sitting next to this young couple, and they have a little boy, and we just kind of struck up a little conversation with them, and my wife pulls out her phone, and I can tell she's texting, and I said, I know what you're doing. And she's like, you do? I'm like, yeah, I know what you're doing. And she's like, okay, well, do you want to look at your phone? And I said, no. And she said, I said, well, I agree. Go ahead. And So in the end, I knew that she wanted, because we wanted to buy the dinner for the young couple sitting next to us and their child. And again, full disclosure, they were eating pizza. So it's not like it was a huge sacrifice or, a huge thing, but that alignment has been amazing because it just, it eliminates, a potential source of tension and a big source of tension for a lot of families.
Yeah.
No matter if you have a lot of money or if you have very little money, it can be a real source of tension.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The alignment in finances is hard.
Yes.
I think it's especially hard when you're not tithing. Mm-hmm. And then I often think the Holy Spirit, because he knows what he's doing, puts it on both spouses on their heart at the same time. Mm-hmm. And they end up never engaging in generosity because they're both too scared to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. The husband's too scared to go, the wife's too scared to go to the husband and say, I think we should start tithing. Mm-hmm. Because of the fight that's going to happen. So they never have the conversation. They never tithe. They never step into generosity, all because they're scared of a conversation. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've always tithed and everything. My wife is crazy generous. Mm-hmm. Lots of empathy, lots of compassion. So she's pushed me way harder. And now I would be the one in that situation who'd be more, sending the text message of like, we should buy their, dinner. But it's all been because of, my heart has bent more towards her heart. So I love the freedom in that. Yes, same. So Malachi 3, 10 and 11, mm-hmm. God's pretty clear about, I'm going to give this promise. And if you will honor me by bringing your first fruits in, I will pour out my blessing upon you. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes when we're not tithing, we read that and we view it like like an investment strategy or like I'm going to get in on this penny stock now, and then it's going to take off. Right. So what does that scripture look like for you as you are faithful, not only with your first fruits, but with your company's first fruits, and God's pouring out his blessing upon you? What does that look like for God to pour out his blessing upon you? Yeah.
So, and I can see it on both sides, both in our personal lives, as well as in business. I'll start on the business side. We on the ownership team, we say all the time, not one of us, and collectively, we are not smart enough, we are not good enough, we are not capable enough to go from where we started to where we are today. God's hand has truly been upon us. He has blessed us richly. It doesn't mean that we don't have rough waters. We do. We clearly do. But it has been so clear that his hand is on us individually and on our business. And as long as we continue to trust, we know that he's going to provide. So, we've just seen incredible growth. And even during COVID, when we said, look, we're willing to lose this amount of money to keep everybody employed. Yeah. That didn't happen. Yeah. And it easily, and for many businesses, it did. And it didn't happen for us. And again, it's not because of what we know or what we do or our education or anything. It's just because God has just richly blessed us. And we're so incredibly thankful. And then personally, the same thing. My wife and I, we do like to be generous. And it seems like the more generous we are, the more peace that we have, our marriage is even stronger and stronger, and God just continues to provide. We have 2 kids that have been married, one that's getting ready to be married, 3 kids that graduated from Ohio State, and all those decisions we're looking back going, okay, how are we going to do this? Can we do this? How are we going to do it? And God provided. Just absolutely provided, so we can do that and continue to be generous.
Yeah, I think you've already answered what I'm about to ask you in a few different ways, but I'll just ask a more pointed question is, what advice would you give someone out there, whether they're single, married, young, old, who they want to tithe, but they don't know how to start, or maybe they're too afraid to start? What is the starting point? What would that look like for somebody? Yeah,
and that's probably different for everybody, but I would say, first of all, pray about it. Really learn and seek what God is trying to tell you. I think for me, I tend to be stubborn at times, and tend to want to think things out. And my wife is very good at just being in tune with the Holy Spirit, and just leading us in a direction. So I would say pray. And really listen to God's voice on what He's telling you. Read the scriptures. pretty clear what Scripture says. You've mentioned a couple of verses already, and in the end, just trust. It took me a while to get there, and I think I said I became a Christian when I was 12, and it wasn't until I was in my probably late 20s that I rededicated my life and started experiencing what my grandma talked about on putting God first in everything, and just knowing that He's going to take care of you and provide for you, and everything will fall in place.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that when we had lunch before this, just kind of talk about some things about wanting to give people, more of those practical steps. We have a budget. I lit up when you said spreadsheets. We certainly have a budget that we follow pretty closely. And you mentioned that your wife's really good at that. What does the practical side of your budget look like? And having actually a plan in place, does that help you, tithe and be more generous?
It does. And we have, we've done every type of budget you can imagine, from something as old school as having envelopes that have, food on it and right, entertainment, church and, other generosity and then miscellaneous. So we've done all those. We've done spreadsheets and I think all those are important, to really help to bring some structure to it. But for me, letting go and just trusting was probably the biggest step that I could take. That really led me to having a heart of generosity.
Yeah, I love that. Anything tangible that you can actually look at. It's like so many things in life. If you don't have a plan, it's never going to happen. So I wonder how many people would hear this podcast or hear the messages during this series and think to themselves, we should do this. And they've had that thought before. They've thought about tithing before, and without the plan, without, anything tangible in front of them, without the hard conversation, they're just, going to suffer through that conviction. And then the next time we do a series on it in 2 years, they'll be right back in that same place again. So we actually have something at Rivers Crossing that we call the Tithing Challenge, which I think is really cool. It's a 3-month tithing challenge. So if you will step out in faith and you will, give your first fruits for 3 months, and then evaluate at the end of 3 months, did your intimacy with God grow? Did, your marriage improve? Or is your heart aligned more with your spouse? Maybe your mental health has improved. Maybe a work situation worked itself out. Are you seeing God's blessing in your life? That doesn't mean, I tithe $1,000 and now my bank account has $10,000 in it. Like those stories exist. I've never had one. Would love to have one of those. Would love for the $20,000 check to just show up in my mailbox. But I at the same time, I couldn't stop listing off the ways that God has blessed me because we continue to tithe and live generous lives. So we'll put some info at the bottom of this if you want to get more information about the Tithing Challenge, because I would really like people to take that up. I think when people are willing to commit to that, to give their first fruits, to formulate a plan, to have a tough conversation, and they tithe for 3 months, at the end of that, if you don't feel like your intimacy with God has improved, we'll give you all of your tithe money back. Won't ask you a single question. We will just write you a check back because we believe in it so strongly. So we'd just like to challenge people to do that. But thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sharing so openly.
Thanks for having me.
A pleasure to get to know you. I wanted to hang out more often, but you kept saying Ohio State and not Bearcats. So I'm going to kind of pull some of that back, but I had a good time.
You should come play golf sometime.
Yes. Brandon, when I played with Brandon played very well. I did not so much, but it was still fun.
Well, if I come, you will feel like you played very well because I have never golfed before in my life. So
there you go.
Yeah, he's still graduating from Top Golf.
I am. It's either we've gone to Top Golf a few times now. It's either back of the net or like right off the ball dispense machine. Every other one.
Yeah, like you want to go chase it off the.
Yeah. I'm like that kid in the Mighty Ducks who, I can hit it really hard, but I'm just 1 out of 4. So I won't be golfing anytime soon.
I got you. I got that reference. Mighty Ducks.
Yeah. But thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you guys on our next episode.